Dear Biker, I live in Salina, Kansas. This sighting took place in late August of 2004, just after 6 a.m. I typically rode my mountain bike for exercise, and that day was no different. About 30 seconds after turning on to the last section of a residential street on my route, I see something run into the street about 25 to 30 feet in front of me. This entity was sprinting like its life depended on it, as if something was chasing it. It came from the yard on the east side of the street, crossed in full stride, and entered the yard on the west side. The whole sighting lasted about 5 seconds. Now this entity, it was bipedal, approximately 1 to 1.5 feet tall, and wore an earthy, greenish-brown hooded cloak. The only visible features were its ankles and feet, which were also covered in the same greenish-brown color. Once it stepped into the grass, it visibly disappeared, almost like the cloak shifted color to match the grass. My first thought was, gnome? But rational thinking told me that gnomes don't exist. I was confused and chose never to tell anyone about the sighting, fearing harassment or ridicule. Now to this day, I've never shared it with anyone, and I didn't report it sooner because I had no idea where to even file something like this. Over the years, I'd occasionally have flashbacks about the encounter, but for the most part, I put it out of my mind. And then just last week, a video titled Alien Races A through Z popped up in my YouTube recommendations. After watching it, the second part mentioned a race called the Lang, and it showed images of 2 pointy-eared human-like entities. And instantly I had a flashback and I thought, maybe that's it. Maybe that's what I saw. I searched the internet for alien race Lang, and I discovered that they're associated with elven folklore and are said to be about 70 centimeters tall, roughly 2 feet. Anyway, I just wanted to share this with you and your viewers. Thanks. Signed, Randall. Dear Tattooed Biker, in the summer of 1991, I was driving on State Route 35 between Forest, Mississippi and Harper Valley, sometime between 9 and 10 p.m. And that's when I saw a wild-eyed creature, what I later referred to as a dogman. It stood between 7 and 8 feet tall and was on all fours as it crossed in front of my vehicle. Now at the time, I was driving a 1987 Honda Accord 4-door, and I was employed by the Mississippi Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks as an assistant park manager at Golden Memorial State Park in Leake and Scott County off of Highway 492. After leaving that position, I moved to Hardin County, Tennessee. First to 195 Goldman Street Extension in Savannah, and then from March 1992 until February 2006. After my divorce, I relocated to 295 Windy Pines Lane in Counce, Tennessee, where I have lived since February of 2006. I've had several sightings since that first one. In 1995, while driving on Mississippi State Route 25 between Elk Landing and Goat Island Road, I saw the creature again. And it appeared between a red brick house and the nearby railroad tracks. And then it ran across the highway into a kudzu bank, all in broad daylight. I encountered it once more in the fall of 2006, this time in Hardin County, Tennessee, on Highway 128 between Sand Hill, Holiness Church, and Stag Lane. The creature crossed in front of my 1992 Cadillac Seville at an unbelievable pace. Then in the winter of 2008, I saw it again at a four-way stop sign in Pyburn Road near the Bruton Branch convenience store. And my last sighting was in December of 2010 on the Pickwick Dam Levee on State Route 128, just above the four-way stop at State Route 57 near the State Park Golf Course. Now, I am a former state-certified law enforcement officer, academy trained in both Tennessee and Mississippi. Without question, these creatures are real. Because of these encounters, I no longer drive at night or venture out into the woods. I live on 43,000 acres at Pickwick Lake, surrounded by national and state wildlife refuges across Mississippi, Alabama, and Tennessee. I have no reason to lie or fabricate anything. Every sighting happened with eyewitnesses present in the vehicle. The creature I saw near the railroad overpass bridge in Tishomingo County on Highway 25 was the very same one that I encountered on the levee along State Route 128 in December. It seems that these creatures travel through swampy or drainage ditch areas near roadways, or through forested regions with heavy tree cover beside pastures. Thank you for taking the time to read this. I just wanted to share what I've observed. Signed, Anonymous. Dear Tattooed, near Gallup, New Mexico, on July 4th, 1991, something extraordinary happened to myself and my family as we traveled along Interstate 40. It may sound unbelievable, but after everything I've experienced over the years, it's become hard to dismiss. My family has deep roots in New Mexico. My father was born in Roswell in 1904, and our lineage traces back to Norway. My ancestors came to the Southwest while working on the railroads, and in 1916, my grandfather was killed in Las Vegas, New Mexico. Afterwards, my father lived with his aunt in Roswell, and he rarely spoke about his past. I learned early that strange things seemed to follow our family in that region. Well, every summer, my father took me back to New Mexico, and whenever we approached Gallup or the high desert, something unusual always seemed to happen. It became so common that I eventually stopped being startled by it. Later, in 1987, while living in Tucson, I started seeing strange lights in the sky. One night I followed them into the desert, and I ended up needing police assistance to get out. That incident required a lot of explaining, and since then, most people haven't taken my report seriously. Now, whenever I return to New Mexico, I often feel watched, and I believe the activity is connected somehow to my family history. On the night of the 1991 incident, we were driving from Flagstaff toward Albuquerque. My husband was behind the wheel, and our 14-year-old daughter and 12-year-old son were in the back seat, and I was in the front passenger seat. Somewhere west of Gallup, we noticed strange, flashing yellow lights on the road. As we got closer, it looked like a roadblock set up in the middle of the desert darkness. Figures, all wearing yellow reflective gear and hooded coverings, stood along narrow, single-lane section of the highway. Every one of them faced the wrong direction, away from the oncoming traffic. Their posture and movements felt wrong, almost staged. As we entered the narrowed lane, the pavement beneath us seemed to disappear. Suddenly, everything went dark. A blinding flash of light filled the car, and in the next moment, we found ourselves a full mile earlier on the highway, as if we had been moved or reset. As we continued driving, I noticed the hills on our left repeating. My son began screaming in panic because he recognized it too. My husband, always somewhat absent-minded but steady, just focused on getting us into Gallup. We checked into a hotel that instantly felt strange to all of us. Something about the atmosphere was off, almost dreamlike. Around 2 in the morning, we went out for a meal. People were moving as though time had slowed down. Our waiter brought our menus upside down and struggled with even simple tasks. Everyone around us seemed confused or detached, as if they weren't fully present. I acted calm to keep my kids from panicking, but the entire environment felt off. The next day brought even more strange experiences, which I can share later. Eventually, we decided to abandon the trip and just return to Phoenix. Many years later, when my son was 25, he suddenly asked me, "Mom, did we ever take a trip and pass the same mountain several times?" That memory had stayed with him, even though we rarely discussed it. I believe something took our entire car that night. I think we were moved, examined, and then returned, slightly before the moment we were taken. When we drove past the same mountain again, the roadblock and the reflective figures were all gone. No lights, no workers, nothing. I have also seen similar hooded figures in Tucson, pretending to repair light poles in the middle of the night. When I approached them, they scattered instantly. My husband had his own experiences as a child in Reno, where a craft reportedly landed in his yard. My father had encounters during his service in World War II. Whatever intelligence is behind these events seems to follow certain families. I think they know who can see them without causing chaos. Once in California, I noticed a strange contrail appear out of nowhere while stepping outside during a deposition. I don't believe these things work with the U.S. government, and I don't think there's any kind of cover-up. I think they simply don't need governments. They move through our world on their own terms, and we only glimpse them by accident. Many frightening UFO encounters may simply be misunderstandings between two very different species. I wish I had reported all this when it happened, but at the time, I knew no one would believe me. Signed, Mary Beth. Dear Tattooed Biker, I'd like to report a sighting I had in downtown Melrose Park, Illinois, at Winston Plaza, off Route 64 West, North Avenue, on Saturday, July 29th, 2017. I was leaving the Best Buy store there with my husband when we saw what looked like a large black bat flying over the building. It must have been at least 20 feet in the air, completely solid black and moving extremely fast. I reached for my phone to try and take a picture, but by the time I dug it out of my purse, unlocked it, and opened the camera, the creature had already flown a good distance away. I did manage to get one clear picture before it moved too far from us. Now, I'm not the best photographer, and my phone is a few years old, but you can still see the object in the image as it flies east toward the city. I couldn't make out many details since it was so high up and traveling so quickly, but it was definitely solid black, much larger than any bird I've ever seen, and it was flapping its wings slowly and had a wingspan of about 15 feet. I hope the picture helps identify whatever it was. Signed, Deborah. Dear Tattooed, I grew up in the Pacific Northwest on large properties surrounded by forests and tree farms. My friends and I spent most of our childhood roaming around, climbing trees, following deer paths, and wandering for hours. Near one of the houses I grew up in, there was an old abandoned place that we called the Witch's House. Real original, I know. It was falling apart, with broken windows, a sagging roof, and rotted floorboards everywhere. None of us ever went close to it because something about it just felt wrong, even in the daylight. It genuinely scared us. Between my family's property and that house was a large bramble of blackberry bushes, dense and thorny, so we never tried to go over there anyway. Well, one afternoon, my friend and we found the tree house on the edge of the woods. It was farther up behind what would have been considered the witch's house backyard. While we were checking it out, we thought we saw movement near the back door of the abandoned house. So we got spooked and we left. About a week later, we were further up in the woods on my family's land, north of the abandoned house. We were just climbing trees again, each of us picking our own. We weren't very high up, but high enough that if someone passed by, they wouldn't immediately see us. We heard branches snapping and instantly stopped talking. And that's when an old man stepped into view, walking towards us from the direction of the witch's house. He wore a worn-down cowboy-style hat. His flannel shirt was faded, and his jeans were old. "Hello, girls," he said. I froze. How did he see us up in those trees? Maybe we weren't as high up as I thought, or had he been watching us? I knew not to talk to strangers, and I couldn't make sense of why he was coming from that direction. I looked over at my friend. She was older and braver, and she said hello back. He said, "I want you two to be careful in these woods. I've been around a long, long time. Probably longer than you would ever believe, and I wouldn't want you both getting hurt." Then he turned and walked away, heading back toward the witch's house, before completely disappearing into the trees. My friend and I were petrified. We didn't move or speak until we were certain that he was gone. When we finally worked up the courage, we jumped down from our trees and ran back to my house. For weeks afterwards, we watched the witch's house from the edge of my family's property. We used binoculars and waited for any sign of him. We never saw a single person. No lights, no movement, nothing that suggested anyone lived there. Now to this day, I still don't know if he was a real person or something else entirely. But after that day, we stayed closer to home. Whenever the woods felt strange or we sensed that we'd gone too far, we would turn back without question. And I always thought of that old man and his warning. Thanks. Signed, Jessica. Dear Biker, are you interested in scary stories from the woods told by Grandpa and Grandma? No, I'm talking about real stories. The kind that get passed down through generations, because I know a few of them. Here's a little about me. My family's from West Virginia, but I was born in Germany because my dad had moved there. So I grew up split between Germany and West Virginia, spending time with my grandparents and the rest of the family, kind of a 50-50 mix. And that's why I'm so familiar with Appalachian stories and ones from the German woods. Anyway, my grandpa always had a certain respect for the darkness. One night I was trying to bring their old dog, Teddy, inside. It was probably around 7 p.m., just when it was starting to get dark on a normal late summer evening. But he didn't want me going outside at that time. He'd always say, "After 6 p.m., we don't leave the house alone, and once it gets dark, we don't leave at all." Well, for a long time, I figured he just meant because of animals or something. Later, I asked him why we couldn't go outside. And my grandma said, "You don't talk about that or it brings bad luck." Grandpa just said that there were folks around there who went out and never came back. But if I ever pressed him for details, he'd change the subject. It wasn't until I got older, helping with the hunting, woodcutting, and making the woods part of my everyday life, that he started to open up a little bit. He told me the danger wasn't the woods themselves, but the things That's what he always called them, that watch you and want you to stay. Most of them won't hurt you, he said, but they'll make sure you get lost. Back then, I thought it was hard to believe. Well, mostly hard to believe. And I still do to some extent. But when an 80-year-old man swears by this stuff, you start to wonder. A few months later, I asked him again, even though he had always shut me down before, and that time he said, "Boy, sometimes it's better not to know everything. But you really want to know, don't you?" And that's when he started telling me stories. He talked about a family in the 1920s who had immigrated from Belgium. They didn't follow the rules. They'd go out at night, alone and unprotected, and some of them didn't come back. He told me a bunch of stories about people who went into the woods and never returned. He also said, you should never whistle in the woods. If you do, everything goes quiet. No animals, nothing. And when that happens, he said, you've got a problem. You'll feel watched, get chills, and start thinking there's something behind every tree. According to him, whistling wakes up things in the woods that should have stayed asleep. And if they hear it, they'll wait for you. Another rule is no music. No playing it, no listening to it. Not while working and not while hunting. Not because of the animals, he said, but because of the forest has its own rules. Break them, he said, and you won't make it home easy. Too much artificial noise, whistling, music, chainsaws, and even motors can invite these things. And if they come, they might get mad, and then they'll stalk you, and the noise only makes them angrier. Another story he told me involved an old abandoned cabin that everyone avoids. It's empty, but something waits there. And if you walk by, you'll start hearing things. Maybe a footstep, maybe a whisper, but you'll never see anything. And that's when, according to him, you've walked into a trap, because the woods will want something from you. Now, I'm still not entirely sure what to make of these things. Ironically, Grandpa always said that Hollywood monsters were made up nonsense, but his stories, well, he stood by every word. And honestly, the reason I believe at least some of it is because sometimes you'd find these footprints in the backyard, especially out at our woodcutting site, and these wooden symbols shaped like a W in the woods. I only ever saw them once and never again. Like maybe Grandpa had set them up or something. But still, it gave me a strange mix of respect and fear, even if I'm not fully convinced. Now in Germany, people just laugh at stories like these. But if you're interested in hearing more, just let me know. I'd be willing to share. Signed, Dirk.
He's got skulls on his arms, flames on his chest, rides a steel horse, won't ever rest. Chasing whispers through the foggy pines, searching for truths that slip through time. Moonlight bends where he rolls, the shadows speak. They've got souls, inking shadows, leather and lore. He's knocking on the other world's door. Bigfoot's howl, dog man's glare, man in black just vanishing there. Inking shadows, truth to find, paranormal trails in his mind.